Now we're going to look at story fixes where you're going to take stuff out of your book. You're going to subtract. The first thing you might need to do is rein in those wandering plot threads or subplots that are diluting the main story. If you have got your characters wandering all over Tuscany the way I did, rein them in. This is where you're now going to have to start cutting. You're going to have to delete all those lovely scenes that you love. Keep them as bonus material. If you had your characters visiting some random place, but nothing actually happened to further the main story, keep it as bonus material that you can share with newsletter subscribers or on a blog or as an incentive to get people to sign up to your newsletter. Take out the boring parts. This might seem obvious, but all those info dumps, the backstory, the exposition, the bits where your character is thinking too much, you might love those bits, but get ruthless. This is where you have to be ruthless and cut. You want to shorten those, tighten them. If you've got an entire paragraph of backstory, can you bring it down to 1, maybe 2 sentences at the most? If your character is, saying 1 line of dialogue and then an entire long paragraph of internal thought, thinking about that line of dialogue, and then another line of dialogue followed by yet another big chunk of introspection, cut. Are your supporting characters getting too much attention? I made this mistake in my 3rd HarperCollins novel, which was To Catch a Star. I had this amazing sidekick to my hero. His name was Dominic. He was a stuntman, and he was just such a delight on the page that, of course, he just kept taking over every scene he was in. And I had to be ruthless, and I had to cut his scenes right back. And what I did was I gave him his own book, and he got his own book in Not a Fairy Tale. So if you find that you have got a secondary character that you are just loving so much and they're just having so much fun on the page, just tell them to back off, and if need be, give them their own book. Promise them their own book after this. The next thing, and I think this was also one of the, I'm doing a bit of a blank now because it's been a couple of days since I read Jordan's post, but shorten the middle. If you're getting bored, the reader will be bored. So you don't have to have this very long middle. If you feel that it's taking too long and you don't know, shorten your story. This is the wonderful thing about publishing today. With ebooks, the pressure is off to have a book of a certain length, like we used to have. In the old days, publishers had very strict guidelines of how many words their books needed to be. If you're writing, I think pretty much the only publisher that really is still very worried about that are category romance publishers like Mills and Boon, Harlequin. They have very strict word length guidelines. But everyone else is pretty much, if your book lands up being 50,000 words and you wanted it to be 80,000, if you plan for 80 and it lands up being 100,000, there's a lot more flexibility nowadays because the costs to produce an ebook really are not what they were for print. With print, if you go, I think it's anything beneath 25 or 30,000 words, it becomes impossible to bind the book because it needs a certain width of binding to make the book to make the binding hold. And obviously, if you've got too many words, if you're going 100,000, 130,000 upwards, it becomes too expensive to print because you're now obviously using a lot more paper. So in the old days where print ruled all, yes, there were very strict word guidelines, but nowadays you can generally get away with it. So if you find that your book is getting overly long and boring, tighten up that story. Even if you land up with a long novella, it's still better to have a long novella that intrigues readers, that readers love, that can be published and make it and win you new readers and help you get to the next book. And if you're anything like me, you start with novellas and you slowly grow and grow and grow until every book starts to be 100,000 words and your editor says, please, can you cut them back? So as I say, if you're feeling bored, cut. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about the final word counts.